Welcome to Sam's Book Club. Today we're going to talk about the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. And it's one of my favorite books. It had an absolute impact in my life as I saw the world very differently after reading this book. And now if this is the first time you're watching Sam's Book Club, I am Sam, and this is the book club. This is a book club specially created for leaders of the Digital Evangelism Initiative within the Adventist Church. What is that? That is a group of leaders that we have around the world who are leading their teams in this mission to reach every human being alive with the love and message of Jesus Christ. So this is what we do. I invite you to close your eyes and pray, even if you're listening to this afterwards, except if you're driving, then perhaps just keep your eyes open. Let's pray. Dear Jesus, thank you for another time of meeting. Thank you for this book, Outliers. There are great truths that are found in this book, and we want to talk about them tonight in light of your word and for the benefit of this digital evangelism initiative and this mission that we have to reach every human being alive. Thank you for those that are waking up in the middle of the night to be here and go through this together. Be with them as we all struggle together with this book. We pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. So Outliers, I'm not going to ask those of you that read it or didn't, but it is a tremendous book. Outliers is one of those books that you need to read more than once. That's the thing. I've read it, I think, 3 or 4 times now. And you need to it will help you to look at the world differently. Instead of just looking at the world and coming to conclusions, you start thinking about things before you make a decision as to why they're happening. Perhaps you are the curious type that wants to understand how things work. This book is for you. And it's an excellent book in terms of redefining what success is like. So there is an idea that rich and wealthy and successful people, that they all have inherited that success and they have inherited that wealth. In part, this is true. There is a lot of wealth that is inherited, but just like it's very easy to get rid of wealth, it is a lot harder to make it. And so it's common for children and grandchildren who do not have the abilities of administrating and making resources and, accumulating resources for them to get rid of the whole fortune. You can get rid of an entire fortune of billions within 10, 20 years. It is not unheard of, especially as crisis occurs. So you have multiple millionaires and billionaires that decide to only give their children a couple of million, and that's it. They have to make do with a couple of million. I wouldn't mind. But that did not happen. I remember visiting my uncle. He was the owner at the time, this was in the 80s, of the largest leather treatment plants in South America. The guy was swimming in money. He was very wealthy. He had factories all over Brazil. He had offices in most major capitals of Europe and Africa and everywhere. And he was my father's brother, okay? So I remember visiting him, and there was this expectation for what we would get for Christmas, because it was near Christmas. This was December, and it was the first time we were to meet him, and we went to the factory, which was a world in itself. And that's where the main leather thing was done. And this was like 1 in every 3 shoes sold, at the time in South America came from one of his factories. The leather came from there. So it was incredibly large, the whole thing. And we got there, and there were multiple people to see before we got to him. Uncle Neri, Tio Neri is his name. And by the time we got to his office, we talked for about 30 minutes, and that was it. There were no presents. There was absolutely nothing. The guy was ruthless, and it seemed to have no compassion about him at all. It was pleasant enough, but that was it. We were out and back to being poor. Well, not quite, but all the hopes I had of meeting a rich uncle did not materialize. And it was an interesting experience. A few years later, what happened was the people that he contracted to digitize all of his systems, because now it was too complex to run a system on books. This was the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s. And throughout the 90s, they converted all of the processes to digital processes. So by the year 95, 98, the entire system collapsed. He could not keep up. And when he died, of course, he still died a very, very wealthy man, but the whole thing had collapsed. He declared bankruptcy, and there was nothing left within the space of 10 years. He should have given me a Christmas present. No, those two things are not related. My father had from his first marriage, he had two sons. The youngest son of his first marriage is about 15, 20 years older than me. And he was one of the administrators of this company by the time it was ending. And they've been fighting in courts for 20 years. And every now and again, my brother says, I'm going to get the apartment in Ipanema. And I'm like, what? He had an apartment in Ipanema? Yes. I couldn't get the one in Copacabana, but I think the one in Ipanema we're going to get. And so it's a huge court case after court case and a whole mess. Why? Because where there is wealth, you can gain it, but you can also lose it very, very quickly. And this book talks about wealth in a different way. It says people that are geniuses, it's not what you think where they got their genius from. And he points out, he starts the book with hockey players in Canada don't have their birthdays in December. There's virtually no champion hockey player whose birthday is in November or December. And you're like, that's impossible. There's no way that this could happen. Why is this? And by the end of tonight, you will understand why there are no champion hockey players in Canada whose birthdays are November and December. You will understand why. And he goes through a lot of principles. I'm going to talk about 6 principles that he goes through. The first one is that opportunity knocks for some people and it doesn't knock for others. Do you find that to be true? And it seems unfair, doesn't it? That some opportunities come to some people and others don't have that opportunity. When I grew up I was born in it wasn't larger than a little village in the state of Santa Catarina, Brazil. This is the tip of Brazil, the bottom tip of Brazil. There are 3 states. Mine is the middle one. Okay, so Santa Catarina is the name of the state. And to the west of it, all civilization was in the east. And then as things progressed to the west, it was just a mess. And it wasn't as developed and it wasn't as wealthy. My father was a lawyer for many of the cities for the west of the state. And so I was born there. And he was 63 when I was born. I'll let that sink in a little bit. Now, my mother was 23 when I was born. I'll let that sink in a little more. There were 40 years difference between them. And my mother was born out of wedlock because my grandmother was pregnant when she was in her late teens, early 20s, to a Palestinian tradesman. Okay, it gets a lot more messy than this, so you need to follow along with this story. So my mother, born out of wedlock, her mother was kicked out of the house because they were a good Catholic family, so they couldn't have that in the family structure. No, my grandmother had to fend for herself, moved town, and then worked in a hospital. And my mother grew up there in the outskirts of the hospital and sometimes in the hospital. It was a big mess. She needed to get married. Now, she found a widower, an Italian widower. This family was also very much Italian, that come from Italy at the turn of the century. And now we have an Italian man, a widower, with, I think, 6 children, who needed a wife to take care of his children. And my grandmother had 1 child, and she needed a husband to take care of her because you didn't have the opportunities we have today. So then they got married. Now, as it happens, the guy was a drunkard and beat my grandmother and often my mother senseless. So then the original family decided, let's take this girl and take care of her. So the family that kicked my grandmother out then accepted the young, beautiful girl back and took care of her. But their life was waking up at 6 a.m. and going to bed at 6 p.m. Work, 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 and there was absolutely no joy. And my mother wanted to explore volleyball. She was a great volleyball player. She wanted to explore school and studying and everything, but she was locked in this house of horrors with her aunties that wouldn't let her do anything. I experienced this later because my mother would ship me there for the holidays. And it's just like this. Sunset is coming down and you have to go to bed. There's nothing else. So she decided, I need to get out of here. Now watch this. She met my dad while she was playing volleyball. He was in the pitch next door as a sports club playing tennis. He was 57 and he would play 3 hours of tennis every single day, most of his life. And then they met, and she found in him a friend, a father figure, and a lover, all in one person. Let's go. She wouldn't let him go. This was a shock to the city because he was the lawyer in that city. It is the second or third largest city in the state. Was at the time and still is. And it was a big shock, and people were like, what is this man doing with this young girl? So anyway, she wouldn't let him go. They got married, and then they couldn't have children. They discovered the Adventist church through Bible studies, and my mother made a deal with God. God, if you give me a son, I'm going to dedicate him to the ministry. He's going to be a pastor of this new church I found. And as crazy as it sounds, soon later I was born. She named me Samuel, just like the story of Hannah in the Bible, and I was set to be a pastor. Now, the story takes a turn when I was 3. I'm in the middle of nowhere. This is it's in the west of my state. There isn't much going on in that city. And my aunties do not allow my mother to discipline me as she believes she should. I was 3 years old. And very disagreeable boy, just like my eldest. And my mother decides that she's going to move to the capital of that state because there is no way that these aunties are going to destroy the potential for my future with a education that just is not, there isn't enough discipline in it. Ironically, for me, there wasn't enough discipline. For her, there was plenty more. So we moved. Now I had a cousin, about the same age. And we were exactly in the same situation pretty much in life. And I moved to the capital, and my cousin stayed in this city of Chapecó. That's where this was. Okay, so I moved to the capital of the state, Florianopolis, and he stayed there. This proved to be a fundamental shift in our future. I received an opportunity to move to the capital, and my life would never be the same again. He stayed in Chapecó. Today, he struggles to find a job. When he does find a job, it's very manual labor. Last year, he spent 3 months slaughtering pigs for a living because there was nothing else to sustain his family with. The difference in our development happened because of that decision that my mom made to leave her family and go somewhere else. What is it in your life? What is it in your background, in the history of your fathers, your parents, or your grandparents, where somebody made a decision somewhere and it opened up lots of opportunities for you? Malcolm Gladwell mentions lots of this in this book. Let's take Bill Gates, for example. Bill Gates was just about the only boy, the only teenager who had access to a terminal, to a computer where he could code. He was 13. If Bill Gates had not received that, he would not have had the time. Because he had the opportunity, now he had the time to invest in coding, in developing software. By the time he was 18, he knew he had spent more hours in this programming language than anybody in the world because it was so cutting edge. So when a company needed somebody to hire, who would they hire? Well, him. He was 18. So do you remember the parable in Matthew? This whole book, Outliers, is summarized in that parable where Jesus says, to those that have, more will be given. To those that don't have, even what they have will be taken from them. So because he has thousands of hours of development using that computer language, more is given to him. For those that do not have, even what they have will be taken from them. So the key here is to develop your gifts and take hold of every opportunity that knocks on your door. You don't know if this will be the only one. You don't know if this will be your chance to do something meaningful with your life, especially if you're a teenager. I've noticed a really interesting phenomena, that parents that wait to spend money in their kids when it gets to college find that they spend a lot of money throughout their careers. I've noticed that. And I've also noticed that parents that invest a lot of money when the kid is only 11, 12, 13, 14, to allow the children to develop, their education is paid for in bachelor's, master's, and doctorate. It happened in my own life when I was 13, another one of those turning moments. My mother decided, and my dad had to follow along, said, hey, we're going to sell the house and send this boy to study in England. It's like, no. My dad was like, no, it's not going to happen. It's his inheritance. He will need this house in the future. We took forever to buy a house. Now we have a house. And what are we going to do? Waste it by sending this boy to England? No, we're not going to do that. But my mom said, but God told me that he needed to study in England. Who are you to say no? And my dad is like, it's my house. The tension brew. Actually, I grew up with my parents fighting all the time for various reasons. This was just another example of this. So my mom would put the sign outside for sale, and my dad would come and take it off. She would put it for sale, and my dad would take it off. And eventually what happened, it's a very interesting story. My mom made a deal with him. She said, listen, we're going to take the sign down. Finally, you came to your senses. And here's the thing. Every pastor, the president of the conference, the chief of police that we knew and so on, everybody who was anybody would come to us and say, don't sell the house. You don't want to waste it. Don't sell the house. Don't do it. A house is something that is really meaningful. Right? What if he gives up? He's 13. What does he know about the world? But my mom said, well, God told me to send him. I want to send him. This is it. My mother's face is very simplistic. Not just simple. For her, it's just a switch. Did God? Yeah, God said, then that's it. It's the end of the discussion. And she was convinced God had ordained this. You need to ask her what that means. But she was certain. So she said to him, we're going to take the sign down. But if somebody offers to buy the house for the price we need, we're going to sell it. Deal? And my dad is like, we've lived here for years. No one's ever come here to ask for, yeah, deal. 2 weeks later, somebody comes and says, I really need this house. I'm willing to move into this neighborhood. This house is perfect. And would you accept this for it? It's exactly what we needed. And so my dad, a man of his word, had to shut up and sell the house. Soon later, I would arrive in England in a boarding school with 60 nationalities. This matters a great deal. 60 nationalities in the boarding school. There were only 250 people there. And so I stayed for 3 years. I learned English when I was still a teenager, and that's incredibly important to the story. And more than that, every opportunity that I had, that I was given to speak in public, I took it. Because at first I was forced since I was a child. Then I loved it. So every opportunity I would take it. Now in a different language. So a third culture kid, and I'm going to ask Karen to talk about that a little bit later and what it means to be a third culture kid. But now I was living as a third culture kid in a completely different environment. Then I came back to Brazil and started theology at 17. And then you trace back and you go, hold on a minute. You were given constant opportunities to learn to communicate with multiple nationalities. And that's the story of my life. My first church, when I was a senior pastor, 57 nationalities. I was forced to communicate with multiple people. Today, my whole life is communicating with people of multiple nationalities. In this very call here, we have in this webinar, we have people from practically every continent. And it matters how you communicate with them differently. And if I was talking to each individually, it would appear differently. So you see, those decisions that I had really nothing to do with, they changed the entire course of my life and allowed me to follow along in my 10,000 hours. And that's the second principle in the book. So the first one is that opportunity knocks for some, not all. But every one of us has some opportunity that has come to us. You see the point? All of us, God gives us different opportunities that we should grab with both of our hands and do it. There are some of you here that have started experimenting with digital evangelism, digital marketing. You have an opportunity in your hand. Some of you have always thought of being a writer, and now the church is investing in you as a writer. This is a golden opportunity. Oh, but I'm 30 something. I'm not a teenager anymore. You have your whole life ahead of you, even if you're in your 50s. There is still time to put in 10,000 hours and become amazing at that which you have now an opportunity to do. Because all of this compounds. Remember, we talked about atomic habits some time ago? Every improvement compounds on the rest that you have. So the second one is timing, critical to success as opportunity. The timing of things, having the opportunity at the right time. That's also another element. Now, upbringing is incredibly important. Incredibly important. And this is going to be amazingly offensive. The thing you need to understand about this book is that it's totally countercultural with what we have today. Today, you have people that are protesting the fact that some have more than others. There are people that are protesting the fact that some people that have a certain ethnic background have more, and others that have a certain ethnic background have less. And the countercultural claims that are put here is that there are unequal opportunities, and we should fight so that everyone has an equal opportunity. Now, this is a mantra that can come, but the truth is, one, that will not happen. Let's take, for example, one of the factors that is incredibly important in defining your success, your IQ. No one wants to talk about IQ. Why doesn't anybody want to talk about IQ? Do you know how much research has been done about IQ over the last 10 years? Very, very little. Why? Because biology, you cannot mess around with biology. And it's very easy to measure IQ. Some cultures, some ethnicities have a higher IQ than others. Documented. Incidentally, men and women, documented, don't have a difference in IQ. They have the same IQ across hundreds of thousands, millions of people that have been measured. Same. But you do have, for example, Jews. There is a specific kind of Jew. I don't remember. If somebody remembers, please write it. They score off the charts in IQ. It's like the most stupid of them is 140, which is in the 5th percentile of all human beings. Hasidic Jews. That's it. Hasidic Jews. Now, what do you do with that information? And Malcolm Gladwell goes deep into this. He says IQ is not the factor that defines success in any discipline. There are many more factors, but IQ is one of them. You want another one? Delayed gratification. In fact, delayed gratification is the most definitive factor that is non-biological. But before we get to delayed gratification, there are other factors. Have you noticed that attractive people seem to do better in life? That's your DNA gamble. Some people have better symmetry. If you notice, my eyeglasses here, my glasses are bent. And there are some of you that are bothered by it by now. Frankly, I don't care. I can't quite put them right. But there are some that have a more symmetric face. There are some that are happier, have a happier face. Others have a more miserable face. And so you'll find that some opportunities just don't open up for the miserable ones. Ashkenazi Jews. I think that's right, Eric. Yeah. What else is a biological thing that defines? If your ethnicity, which you don't define, is different from the majority country where you live. So if you are in China and you're not Chinese, chances are you have less opportunities or more, depending on what you are trying to do. If you are in Lagos and your ethnicity is from somewhere else and you're a minority, there are less chances for you because less people are willing to trust that which is different. We are more willing to trust those that are more equal to us. Human fact. Is it right or wrong? Well, let's talk about that. But in another podcast, not this one. This one, we're just going to state that we have different opportunities and there are 1,000 things that may differ. Now let's talk about the ones that we can change. Delayed gratification. There is no other factor that determines your success more than delayed gratification. It determines your success probably even more than IQ, although I haven't seen the figures for the comparison between these two. The ability to do what you need to do first and only do what you want to do later. Do you think it's possible for somebody to be incredibly successful without the ability of having delayed gratification? What do you think? Yes or no? Write it. You can write it on the chat. Yes or no? Do you think it's possible? If you're watching this on YouTube later, you can write on the chat as well. Is it possible for you to have delayed gratification, for you to be successful without the ability to master delayed gratification? The answer is no. It is not possible. Why? Because it doesn't matter how much of a genius musician you are. If you don't put in the time to practice, you're not going to be amazing. It is as simple as that. Oh, but I saw a 6-year-old who could play like Bach or Beethoven. I said, yeah, probably Korean parents behind them. That child has played their fair share of hours at home. There is no possibility for success. Now, let's talk about this for a second. What is the number one factor between a child having high delayed gratification capabilities and low delayed gratification capabilities growing up? What is the number one factor? Do you know what that is? That's another book that is worth reading called The Boy Crisis. The most important factor is growing up with or without a father. With or without a father. Children that grow up with the presence of a father, they have a higher level of delayed gratification, regardless of their personality. Because there are some personalities that are more conscientious. We'll talk about that in a moment. Now, growing up without a father, you will struggle much more to have delayed gratification. And the reason is very simple. Mothers would discipline you if you don't do what is right. Fathers will tell you, do what you need to do, and then we play. There are exceptions, but typically that's what happens. That's why fathers connect with their children much more when the children become more responsive at age 1, 1.5. That's when a father naturally picks up a child and throws them in the air and plays with them. The job of the dad is to play with the children. That's his job. And of course, discipline is for both mother and father. But delayed gratification plays very much with fathers because they naturally do this little deal with the child. First you clean your room, then we play. First you do your homework, then we do this. Oh, you want to do this? You want to do this? That's excellent. We're going to get to do this. But first you need to do what you need to do first. Then we're going to do what we want to do later. And it really doesn't matter if you have an average IQ, if you have a strong delayed gratification instinct and you can master it, it's almost impossible for you to be unsuccessful in any given domain if you invest time in a single domain. If you're like a butterfly moving from domain to domain, you're not going to build 10,000 hours in anything. And then who knows what you're good at? I'm average in everything. Well, that's not so desirable. 10,000 hours. It typically takes that amount of time to master something. I have, between filming and in person, about 35,000 hours of public speaking. The last time I calculated, beginning of this year, about 35,000 hours of public speaking between preparing for what I'm going to speak and then speaking it. Now, what does that mean? Some people wonder how I can speak without notes. And if you've heard me speak live, I have absolutely zero notes. Not ever do I take any notes with me. I'm now learning how to preach from a prompter. It's a process for me because usually I just preach and I need about 5 minutes to preach. So I arrived in Hope Channel about 6 weeks ago and to record a little segment interview that I was doing the interview. And they said, well, our preacher failed. And I said, what, do you want me to preach? Yeah, sure. When can you do it? Well, just give me 5 minutes. What, today? Yes. So in 5 minutes, I prepared an original sermon I had never preached before, and I preached it. No notes. Just looked at the camera, all 3 of them, and preached it. Why? 35,000 hours doing it. That's why. It did not happen by chance. And one of my earliest memories of this, and maybe I've told you this before, I was 8 years old and my mother forced me to teach the Sabbath school lesson to the teens. You will do it, but I don't want to. But you will do it. You have that gift. You don't have a choice. You need to use it. And you're going to be a pastor anyway, so you better start. And then I was so scared of her that I did it. And have been doing it since. When I was 11, a crazy elder asked me to preach in the church. I agreed. I loved it, but it was awful. If it was any worse, thankfully it was Wednesday night and not Sabbath morning. I leaned on the pulpit. I almost dropped the entire pulpit from the platform. It was awful. But 35,000 hours later, what you get is somebody who's able to preach or to talk in public. So what if I hadn't invested the time? What if I did not find it meaningful? Because here is the thing. You have to find it meaningful. When you're given an opportunity to do something, if you don't find it meaningful, you're not going to invest the hours. And if you do, it will be just a job. Have you noticed that joggers never become champions in racing in anywhere? Why? Because they're not watching their time. You need to do 10,000 hours of action in a way that will improve what it is that you're doing in that field. So that you need to measure, okay, I've done another hour. Was it better than the previous 4,000 hours? You're always trying to get better and better and better and better. Otherwise, it's just something you do. You brush your teeth every day, many times a day. You're not a champion toothbrusher. Why? Because you're not thinking, tonight, I'm going to brush it better than I did yesterday. If you did think like this, and you are so passionate and you found it so meaningful, then you would be one of the most recognized people in the world when it comes to brushing your teeth. And think about it. Who do you know that is famous for brushing teeth and knows how to brush their teeth really well? Do you know anybody? That's something you could be known for. Helping others brush their teeth. You see, there is no end of domains that you can invest time in that you would not be recognized for and find a meaningful career in. Okay, so that's another element, the meaningfulness of it. And finally, legacy. Legacy only comes when you invest years and decades or intensely, where you live this out, where your values come through in everything that you do. We all have values; those come through. So those are the six things that are brought to bear by the book. But I want to talk about some of the stories because I find them absolutely fascinating. Let's talk about some mysteries in the stories. Do you remember that village or that town in Pennsylvania that lived forever? Isn't that amazing? These guys, they lived longer than anyone else, and they didn't die for the normal diseases that Americans die from. They're still there. You can visit them. Why? Why is this the case? And I thought long and hard about this. And of course, when you think of living longer, what kind of zones do you think of? Blue zones. And you think blue zones. That's what you think of, blue zones. There are 3 defined blue zones in the world. One is in California, where there are lots of Adventists living near Loma Linda. That's one of them. The other blue zone is in Italy. And the third blue zone is in Japan. Okay, so these are towns, villages, areas, regions where people live beyond 100. Like lots of people live beyond 100, not just a couple of exceptions. Lots of them do. And here is something that I've been thinking since reading this book. I've been thinking about what we say about the blue zones. We say, well, of course, the health message. People that eat properly and that exercise and that have sunlight and all the 8 things that we talk about, they live longer. That's why. Except for one thing, guys. The Italians. The Italians are probably the most unhealthy eaters you could imagine. They eat an excess of carbohydrates. They eat pork morning, lunch, and dinner. Everything they cook is in pig's fat. It doesn't get worse than the Italians for eating. They don't exercise that much. So what is it? What is the thing that unites all of them, right? And I never talked about this in public, so, I'm sorry if I'm totally wrong, but I'm going to explore this anyhow. It seems that one thing that is very common in all three places is multi-generational relationships. And the elderly are always respected. In Loma Linda, the elderly are very much respected. They walk around, young people say hi to them, which does not happen in the West. You walk around, you see an old person, maybe you acknowledge them, probably you don't. Most people don't. Now, in Italy, nonna and nonno, when they say something, we do it. It's as simple as that. There is tremendous respect for nonna and nonno. You don't mess around with them. If you see them on the street, you stop to talk about them, to talk to them. When you eat, they're all together. There is a constant flooding of serotonin when you're older. And remember, we talked about serotonin. Serotonin is the hormone that makes you healthy and regulates your mood and helps your organs function properly in many ways. And your cells multiply much more healthily. Serotonin. And when do you experience serotonin? When you see respect, when you feel that you are higher than someone, or at least well in the hierarchy, in the dominance hierarchy of the locale that you find yourself in. Japan, same thing. The purpose of life in Japan is to get old. They love getting old. Getting old in Japan is something that is incredibly respectful. Counter that with what we normally have in the West, where everybody does their best not to appear old, not to look old, not to act old. Being old is the worst possible thing. And when people are old, they are marginalized and rejected by those that are in the workforce that are coming in with bright ideas. That is not the way of God. If you want to live long like this town in Pennsylvania and like the blue zones in California and Italy and the other side of the world, then we need to pay close attention to God's word. Because out of all 10 commandments, the only one that all but guarantees that you will live long is what? The fifth. And what does it say? Look at this. It's crazy. Guys, this is crazy. Honor your father and mother so that your days on earth are prolonged. Now, how do you take a group of slaves in the desert 3,000 years ago, and there is in the middle of the law this nugget of wisdom that if you respect the elderly, you are going to live long. We are scientifically just about covering this in the 21st century. There is no way that this would be an observation for antiquity. Right there in the law is the key to longevity. Mutual respect between the generations. And in society, one of the only places where this happens is the church. The church is incredibly important because we need to allow our elderly and the young to work together, to talk together, to know their stories, and to respect. I remember in England, we wanted to create this environment. So we took groups of teens. Alyssa, this one's for you. We took groups of teens and we organized story night where about 10 teens would go to someone's house. There would be food because otherwise there's no point gathering teens without food. And we would choose one of the elderly from the church. You know, to qualify, you needed to be really in your 70s. That would be the ideal. And in England, there are quite a few people older than that. So you would come and you would tell your story. You would tell of your struggles. You would say what you did with your life. It doesn't have to be anything remarkable, but you just tell your story. And for half an hour, these teens would ask questions. But how did you meet your husband? And what happened when you started working? What was it like back then? Now, something incredible happened. With the teens, yes, but with the elderly. Because when they were in church, now those teens looked at them, acknowledged them, said happy Sabbath to them, and nothing was the same after that for them. Because if you are old, if you're in your 70s, in your 80s, and you go to church and a bunch of teens talk to you in public, in front of their friends, and say hi to you, you don't go home the same. That is the kind of communities that we need to create. Why? Because it matters. And this is just something from this book. You see, it starts to redefine how you see the world. Something else I want to talk to before we open up to questions and so on. The genius of this guy that I can't remember. What was the name of the guy who was the absolutely incredibly intelligent, probably the highest IQ alive, 190 something IQ. What's his name? Can't remember his name. Anyway, the guy was an absolute genius. His mother was poor. He eventually got a scholarship, went to university. And even though he was more intelligent than all of his class and the staff put together, he couldn't stay because his mother forgot to file the paperwork and he had to get out of the university. Then he moved somewhere else, and he couldn't find a way to go to the classes that he was assigned to. So he had to take a bus, and it was a great difficulty getting to work and getting to university and sustaining his job that was sustaining him. And so again, he asked for his classes to be turned around, and they said no. So then he left university, and then he went on to be a bricklayer, got married, and lives on a farm. This guy is more intelligent than Einstein. Listen, he was still alive by the time the book was written. And he is working on a theory of physics, some kind of crazy theory that if I couldn't understand even reading the book a couple of times. And he talks about the universities as them. Now, what happened to him? Let's compare him with the other guy he compares it with, the guy who found a way into leading the nuclear bomb project. It wasn't his specialty. He didn't know much about it. No, this guy would eat Stephen Hawking for breakfast. Ben is asking if it was Stephen Hawking. No. If somebody could find it, please. Eric, you're very good at this. If you could, thank you. So then you have this other guy who is not particularly intelligent like this other one. I mean, he's, of course, clever. He's a scientist of some sort. But he finds a way to convince the head of the military responsible for this Chris Langan. That's it. So he finds a way to lead the team that is doing this bomb, the most important project, scientific project of the last century, arguably, and it's not even his specialty, and he's not even particularly good at it. So then Malcolm Gladwell asked the question: how can you have an absolute genius dropping out of university twice, and this other guy who found a way to lead the most important project in the similar field? And the conclusion that Malcolm Gladwell comes to absolutely blew my mind. And that is, when you grow up poor, especially single parents, you don't learn how to handle authorities. This is a groundbreaker, guys. And it's very controversial. In today's world, what I'm saying is totally politically incorrect. So was Malcolm. Now, considering Malcolm used to write for the Atlantic and the New Yorker and the Washington Post, this is interesting. If you know anything about American news media, those publications are very much would very much disagree with the conclusion he comes to here, which is your upbringing can define the way that you see authority and will define the opportunities that you can take and those that you cannot take. So he describes it this way. When you have Chris Langham, when you have when you have his mother taking him to the doctor, what is the experience? What is the experience of a middle-class parent taking their children to the doctor, clearly an authority in their lives, and a poor person without education taking their children to the doctor? Now, this is a very interesting concept, and I don't know the research behind it, but what Malcolm Gladwell says is the mother without education will say, "Be quiet, I will speak. Don't talk." So this child now looks to the authority and does not believe they have the right to speak or to express themselves or to change the conversation. exactly like Chris Langham experienced at university. People change their class all the time. This is very common, but he didn't know how to talk to authority. He was never taught how to talk to an authority, how to change their minds. He never believed he had the right to do it. And then you have the other university in the same way. A scholarship paper. This is the most intelligent, arguably the most intelligent man alive, with the highest IQ alive. And he couldn't get the university to redefine the papers. He did not have the ability to show his professors in a respectful way that he was multiple times more intelligent than them. Why? Isn't it strange? Now, if you think of upbringing, you then begin to see what people consider privilege. Because if you grow up in a middle-class family, you have the privilege of knowing how to deal with authority. You're not resentful that people are in positions of authority. And this is incredibly important. When I grew up, let's take the people that interact with us, doctors and the police and a few others. So my father was a policeman. He was a coronel, which is the highest ranking police rank that you could get in Brazil. And I grew up around police. And my father always would not allow us to mention his rank if we're ever stopped by the police. Never. We could not do it. And if we did it, it would be terrible consequences when we got home. If you're doing something wrong, or if the police perceives that you're doing something wrong, follow the instructions. Later, if they did something wrong, there are courts, and we will prosecute them. But when they tell you to do something, do it. And do not mention that your father is a coronel. Because in Brazil, that's a really respectful rank. If you're stopped, police stops you in the car or stops you in the street, and I gave plenty of reasons for the police to stop me as a teenager. I used to rollerblade, and we would grab the back of buses and cars, and we would go up the hill grabbing the bus, and it was totally illegal to do that and dangerous. And the police stopped us a few times in those circumstances, and they would take us to the police station. I would wait. If I mentioned just in passing, hey, my dad is a coronel, they would immediately take me home rather than the police station, out of courtesy that you're in the military. Because in the end, it's either my father would have to come, or, I was 13, for goodness sake. So we were not allowed to do that. Why? Because learning how to treat authority is something that the middle class does automatically. It is not something that is difficult for them. So let's go back to the other guy who led the other project, who could manipulate authority, you could say, who could work the system. His mother would take him to the doctor and would say, the doctor will ask you a few questions. Answer their questions, or his or her questions. Then they will give you an opportunity to ask your own questions. And you need to do it. If you have any questions for the doctor, ask them. So now you have a child who is being taught that they have the opportunity to speak with authority and to lead the conversation. You can ask the questions and the doctor will speak according to what you want him to say. You decide what the next words of the authority will be based on what you are saying, because you have that right. It's okay. You can do it. And this is why people that have that skill that is learned, they can convince teachers, professors, bosses, and everyone to bend the system to help them. I've done it all my life. And there is nothing wrong with this. Manipulating the system is bad. Influencing the system is good. And this is how it plays out. If you have something that you need to do your job better, you need to talk to your boss, you need to take a project to a committee, this skill is paramount. In fact, if you don't have this skill, there are chances that you will never even be given the chance to present anything to any committee. This is serious stuff. What if I don't have it? What if in my upbringing, I was never taught how to deal with authority, how to talk to people and how to influence them to give me more resources and more tools to do what I need to do? What if I was never taught this? Then read books about it. There is a book called Gravitas, incredibly important book for you to read, so that you could both be pleasant and stand your ground and get what you want from the people that have the most influence over your life. So these are some of the things that have impacted me from the book, and I would like to now open for other comments. And I will add a caveat that if you were upset by some of the things I said, read the book. He can articulate it much better than I can in this short talk. So let's go ahead. Anyone wants to say something? I won't call upon you. You go ahead and say something. The panelists that are here and those that are attending. Enoch, go for it.
Thank you. It's incredible. Something I'm just wondering about is what you've said is true, that the book has made it clear that the way you are brought up also sometimes could determine who you want to be. It denies you the opportunity to explore. Look at, for example, your experience. Your mother said that you will be a pastor, and say that's what she wanted you to be. If you showed any other talent or gift, she could shut it and say, no, I want you to be this.
Yes.
That happens a lot. For example, here in Kenya, a parent is a teacher and gives birth to children. The child performs very well in high school, because after high school is when you determine that the grade in high school determines what you want to be, which is also a limitation. If you get an A, you're an engineer, you are you're a doctor, you are a lawyer. But if you get a B plus, a C, now is when you start thinking of going to do something. So a very good a very talented musical person who has a very good talent in music scores an A, but he's forced to go and do medicine or engineering because that is not his field, that is not his interest. But because of the way we were brought up, like an A person should be an engineer or a doctor, that's what he goes to do, and ends up limiting this person's potentials. I remember somebody once told us a story of a student who really wanted to do music, and the father insisted, no, you must go do teaching. The student went and did teaching, finished, performed very well, graduated, brought his degree and gave it to the father on the table, that this is the degree you sent me to do for you, here it is. She went back to do music, and now she's a very good teacher in music.
Right.
So it is all about the environment and the culture that we were brought up in that has, I can say, dwarfed us from growth. We end up doing things that we didn't intend to do. We struggle alongside with them. It's good. Some pick up, like you picked up very well, and it is true sometimes guidance from our parents helps. But also they need to give you an opportunity, like you said, your authority to speak your mind. I remember my father all along, since I was a young boy, because my father is a pastor. All along I used to go with him to preach. Wherever he goes, I'm the one who carries his bag. And I told him one day, Daddy, I want to be a pastor. That's what he knew all along. And everywhere he could introduce me, he says, yeah, my son wants to be a pastor. And people were very excited. Now, as I grew up, I realized I'm doing a lot of craft things, a lot of handwork, molding, shaping cars using wires and all those things. So, and at class 7, I started fixing electrical appliances for my neighbors, my friends, and I started exploring it bit by bit. I realized, oh, this is an area I think I'm interested in. I'm enjoying it. So when I went to high school, in Form 2, I was put in charge of our PA system in charge. And at the end, by the time I got to Form 4, and in Form 3, a family friend who went to college, that is a university in Kenya known as Baraton University, you must have known about it, graduated from doing automotive, and immediately he got a job. And that inspired me. Given of my background and the interest I've had, I said I must go to Baraton to do engineering courses. I went through, so by the time I finished Form 4, I came home and my dad asked me, no, so are you still continuing with what you had told me earlier? I told him, yes, Daddy, I want to continue with that. But I would like to begin with this. So by the time I finished Form 4, most of the students, when they finish Form 4 is when they start thinking of what to do, comparing, doing counseling, like elimination process until you arrive at. But before I did my final exam, I already knew what I want to go and do. And my dad didn't force me to continue with theology, but allowed me. I told him, yes, I want to begin with from here. And in one way or another, I will find a way of ministering in my line. Or if God allows me to still go to theology, I will do it. And I went, enjoyed, did my electronics, a bachelor's in electronics, and I enjoyed it all along. And right now, I'm working with Hope Channel Kenya in Kenya. And that means I'm already in the line of ministering to somebody somewhere. So in that way, when we get to know our ability and take time, take chance, the opportunity, as we said, it helps you to grow and be a great person. Now, my question I wanted to be assisted is, now these 10,000 hours, how do you achieve them? They sound too big, as in, how do you achieve 10,000? What do I have a timeline for the 10,000 hours that I must achieve within 1 year, between 10 years? So that's an area we need to be assisted.
Excellent question. Let's start with the first part, which is the deterministic nature of parents.
Yes.
If you were to ask my mother, she would say that a son is what his mother determines.
Mm-hmm.
That's her opinion. I happen to disagree with that opinion. The key here is you need to find it meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
You need to find the work meaningful for yourself. And serotonin does play a part. If your neighbors were never happy with you fixing their stuff and they never gave you respect for it, chances are you wouldn't be attracted to it. So
Yes.
God has inbuilt in our biology a way for us to follow the things that we do well and for us to find meaning in them. If we can find meaning in them, then it would be much better. So I found meaning in ministry. My father, however, wanted me to be a diplomat. He was certain that the diplomatic track for me would be tremendous and he convinced me, right? So when I was 11, 12, and when he saw that I was taking this pastor thing really seriously, he went to the conference and he talked to the president and said, okay, I need to know what it's like to be a pastor. How much do they get paid? What are the benefits? What do they get? He came home and said, you're not going to be a pastor. They don't get paid enough. It's going to be a terrible life. You're not going to do it. You're going to be a diplomat. And I'm like, what does that mean? Well, it's a wonderful life. You get to represent your country. You travel all over the world. You're picked up when you get to the airport. You stay in great hotels. It's going to be a life. It's going to be wonderful. And he sold me on this. And I came to my mom and said, Mom, I'm going to serve God as a diplomat. My mom said, listen, I don't think you realize that you don't actually have a choice. I dedicated you to ministry. You were dedicated in the womb. You don't have a choice. And I'm like, Mom, of course I have a choice. I'm going to be a diplomat. And when I was 13, God gave her the vision to go to England. And it was in England, talking to a friend. His name is Jonathan. He's doing his PhD at Andrews at the moment. Jonathan Ferreira, great friend. And talking to him, he didn't know anything about my story. And he goes to me after 3 months knowing me, Sam, have you ever thought of being a pastor? You'll be a great pastor. And I hated that sentence because now I had to contend with this. So I went back to my room. I struggled with God all night. And just like Jacob, by the time I finished that night, I decided I'm going to be a pastor, and I haven't looked back since. So I honestly don't think I had a choice. I agree with my mom, but most people do have a choice. They have not been dedicated in any particular way, and God will lead them accordingly through their life. Now, here's an interesting caveat. Today, I represent the kingdom of God. I go to various different countries, around 15, 20 countries a year. I'm picked up at the airport. I stay in okay hotels. They're not great, but they're not bad either. And the life that my dad wanted me to have as a diplomat, as a bonus, God gave me as a pastor. So I'm very thankful for that full circle scenario that happened there. In terms of the 10,000 hours, Enoch, it takes about 10 years of hard work to build your 10,000 hours. That's what it takes. So, average of 6 hours a day, focused and trying to be better at it, like a musician and so on. And the thing about it is, once you do have 10,000 hours in a specific field, you don't have to do any work. You will be recognized for that thing that you do. And it just happens. But here's the thing. It's not just the time that you're doing it. It's the intention of time of trying to get better at it. Okay. So, you mentioned working with sound, since you were a teenager. Every time you work with sound, you plan for, and you make it better than what it was, and you're constantly attentive to it, then every hour matters from your teenage years. And I want to use this to answer the question as to why, because otherwise I will forget. Why there are no hockey players whose birthdays are in November and December. It's a mystery. Well, I'm going to tell you the mystery. The cutoff date, the cutoff age for the first pick is 10 years old. So this is what it means. When the children are all 10-year-old, they're all playing hockey. The committee comes through and they select the top players when they're 10. So you have to be 10 years old. 11 years old you can't be. 9-year-old you can't be. You have to be 10. And then they select you, and it happens at the end of the year. They select you, and if you were playing half an hour a week before, now you are playing 2 hours a week. 3 years later, when they're 14, I think 14, 4 years later, then they pick the best, and you go from 2 hours a week to about 6 hours a week of hockey. And then when you're 16, you're picked again, and then you go full-time, practically. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that for the 10-year-olds, I don't know if you've seen a 10-year-old, but if your birthday is in January 1, by the time December comes and you've had a whole year, you're almost 11. Your muscles are much stronger, your coordination is much better, and you're altogether more capable than someone whose birthday just happened last month and they're now 10 years old. And that is it. That is the only reason. What if you have a very talented 10-year-old whose birthday is in November? They're not going to be strong enough to show that they're very good. So they will go from half an hour a week to half an hour a week, whilst the others will go from half an hour a week to 2 hours a week. So 4 years later, playing 2 hours a week, trying to get better in a very serious way, well, guess what? Again, the January will win because they're stronger at 14. They've had more time with testosterone pumping through. And now that the muscle builds, they're stronger, they're faster, they're more coordinated, and they're picked again. So they go from 2 hours a week to now. And that's why when you get to the top champions, the only difference is the amount of hours purposely spent playing. Some received opportunities to do it and others didn't. And that is a tangible way which this plays out. It doesn't matter how talented you are in hockey. If you're not given opportunities to play a lot, you're not going to be a champion. Now, if you ever wondered why Brazil has so many soccer champions, I mean, it's unreal. Same with Argentina, but Brazil is a particular exception. Well, the school system in Brazil only works in the morning or the afternoon. I'll say that again. You go to school either in the morning or the afternoon. What does that mean? It means that you have millions of young men, and they're mostly men, who have nothing to do all afternoon and evening. So what do you think they do? They play. That's all they do. From the time they get home, when they're 6 years old, they play until sunset, and they play and they play and they play and they play. So when you take 2 million kids playing every year, hours and hours and hours a day, receiving the respect of their friends when they score, when they do what is needed, then Brazil has a great way of selecting the absolute best players. Now let's talk about the Europeans. What happens to the Europeans? Well, they need to go to school in the morning. They finish school at 4 p.m. Then it's too cold. Then they come play. Then they need to do music. And then they need to do this. And then they need to do that. And by the time you get to be 18, 19, 20, it's very rare to find a young person that was given the opportunity to play 50 hours a week, which is what the Brazilians ones are playing. So this is a tangible way that you have this difference here. Okay, who else wants to say something? Emenike, I see your hand here.
When we talk of upbringing, I'm actually speaking from Nigeria. This is about 2 a.m.
Thank you for waking up.
Well, sometimes I just wonder what will happen after next week. When you are hooked to something, you don't want to let it go. Okay, I know our last book will be next week, and I just wonder, could it be possible for me to do it for 52 weeks? Amazing. So much I have gotten from this and I have used. What I just want to talk about is upbringing. My father, when I was a kid, told me I shouldn't hide anything from him. And if there's something I want to say, I should go ahead and say it. And if I didn't say it well, he would teach me how to say it. So from when I was a kid, I was very outspoken. I could say my mind. It doesn't matter whose ox is God. It continued. I developed my power to negotiate. I developed my power of speech. I'm very convincing. I used that from secondary school. I became a leader. Wherever there's an opportunity, crisis, I'm always the go-to person. I'm the one to talk about it. It continued until I went to university. During my undergraduate series, I led a lot of demonstration. I was always the person who will lead the group and then negotiate, discuss, and all the rest of it. Finally, today in my business, when I was in the university, my lecturers wouldn't want to argue with me. Sometimes they said, please, we won't even listen. Just go ahead and do it. If you don't want to do it, let's leave it. If I listen to you, you will convince me. Today in my business, I hardly go for any negotiation. If somebody is willing to listen, he will do whatever I want. And I've handed that to my kids. I'm just talking about upbringing. You don't know where, something that starts so small, you wouldn't know where it will lead you. In the church today, I've handled a number of project building, and today, I'm a president of about 2-3 organizations today. And it's so easy for me to talk to people. It's so easy. Just like you, I can do a sermon anywhere, anytime. I need 5 minutes to just decide what do I want to focus. And I can talk for the next 20 minutes, 1 hour, 3 hours on any subject. So I really relate to what you are saying. The most important thing is that we should let, the issue of the father figure is very, very important. People should have role model. My takeaway today from what we've learned, which is also what everybody knows, is that you need to do what you need to do before you do what you want to do. And that's my takeaway. Although, reinforcement comes from hearing something over and over. And like they say, you don't read a book the same way 2 times. You may hear something today. If you read the same book tomorrow, you have changed. So it's a different person that is reading the same book. Thank you.
That is absolutely right. Well, thank you, Emenike, for that. It's amazing how leadership is also something that can be learned, and it's something that you can put your 10,000 hours of investment doing. There are parts of Brazil where there is a lot of experience from multiple generations of church leaders. And this means that people have when you need a great administrator in the church, then this particular region of Brazil is a good place to get people from there from. Why? Because they've had experience and hours leading the Adventist church. They understand how the church works and they can manage the resources properly. So there's a disproportionate number of administrators from that particular state. You will notice in terms of communication that it's becoming increasingly difficult to work in communication in the Adventist church anywhere in the world and not be next to a person who speaks Portuguese, to a Brazilian, to be very specific. Why is it difficult in studios all around the world for you to do the work of communication in the Adventist church and not be near a Brazilian? Because for the last 20 years, communication has been at the absolute center of the work of the church and the emphasis of the church. We have a university that graduates 80 professionals in communication, and that's just one of the universities. There are many more. And those students are envisioned to deliver on the mission of the church. Their main purpose isn't a job in a secular entity. Their main goal is to work for the church. So within 2 hours of this university where I did my master's, my bachelor's, within 2 hours of there, you have a media center that employs 525 people or so. You have a publishing house that employs another 600 employees, and the university itself that employs lots of communicators. So there is now an entire generation of young people that have become amazing and have had experience to work with very high productions. And now when you need a great person to do any media around the world, you have to consider Brazilians. Why? Because that's where people have been given the experience of working on media. And this is just an observation. All the Brazilians are taking over. I'm Brazilian. The director of communication of the General Conference, my boss, is also Brazilian. The guy who is the boss of almost all of our DEI operation in terms of the operation, the managers and working this through and so on, is Arnaldo. He's also Brazilian. Why? Is this nepotism? Is this just a way of getting the same culture, and people that you're familiar with to do the job? No, it's just that Brazilians have had such an exposure to media and production and communication. It's thousands of hours of both practice and thinking of how the church could communicate better. And usually you find them to be very mission-driven rather than job-driven. And that's just another example of how the church uses the different techniques and so on, and the different gifts that people can bring to bear. Okay, I have Alicia. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everybody.
Hi, Alicia.
There is a statement that the author would have made. Our values drive our behavior.
Mm.
And I think that is phenomenal, especially for Seventh-day Adventist Christians.
Right.
The thing is, everybody has a value system of some sort. And it, of course, would be dependent upon where you would have been brought up, who your parents were, how they see right and wrong, how they view justice, and those kinds of things. I remember as a child, I went to a Hindu school. Now, I'm a Christian, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I went to a Hindu school.
Where are you from, Alicia? Which country again? I forgot.
Trinidad in the Caribbean.
That's right.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my mother being very explicit in giving me two things. She said, it's the closest place, it's the closest school to where we live. She said, you are going there for an education. You are not to worship idols. She was very clear about that. And then she also told us the whole issue of honesty. And that was something that she sort of like, pounded us. She said, everybody can be rich, everybody can be, but everybody can be honest. And I remember as a child going to a particular grocery store, with my friends. They used to go on a lunchtime and shoplift. So they would steal chocolate bars and candies and stuff like that.
Mm.
And every time I went, they would say, "So you're taking a thing?" And I would be like, "No." And they just couldn't understand why I wasn't doing it. But it was because my mother had driven this whole honesty factor into my life.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot be dishonest. So when we go back to school, now they would share what they had with me, and of course I would eat. But, but I wasn't going to the grocery and stealing it myself. Now I would want to think that I would have passed on that same value system to my children. Because a few years ago, one of my daughters, we were traveling and we borrowed a bag from a friend. And in that bag, we found 200 Canadian dollars.
Mm.
Now, it was at a time when we really needed money. Things were a little rough, and we found this $200. But it was a bag she bought from a friend. And my daughter was so adamant. She said, "The money's not ours. We have to give it back." And, and I really felt proud of the fact that here was a value system being passed on to the next generation. That if you didn't work for it, it's not yours, then you give it back to who it belongs to.
Right.
And I really love that statement that our values drive our behavior. And I think as Christians too, because our value system comes from the Word of God, then it means that the way we live should be definitely different from everybody else.
Absolutely right. I was talking to my wife yesterday. Her name is Amy, and I was evaluating the first 11 years of my ministry, the ups and downs and so on. And I don't even remember why we were talking about it, but I came to a conclusion that most of the difficulties that I faced in ministry, and Arnaldo was here with me. I've been working with him for, I don't know, 10 years now, or just under. And he's seen some of the hardships that I've had in ministry in England, and almost all of them could be traced back to one character flaw, which is precise speech. For me, as an extrovert, it's very easy for me to exaggerate. So I've been living under this value of tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And it's very difficult for me to be absolutely precise. It's easy for me to say, yeah, I talked to the guy. He loves the project. It's great. No, the guy does not love the project. He just said he's willing to look into it. And for me to take advantage of situations in a way that would invariably benefit something about my life. I'll give you another example. In England, we don't have corporate credit cards. Pastors don't have corporate credit cards. So we have credit cards, our own personal credit cards that if we need to buy something for the church, we put it in that particular credit card. And it's ours. And then within the month, you submit the receipts, the treasurer checks the receipts, and then they refund the church worker, the pastor or the office worker, for the expense. So most of the world does that in the same way. And I decided I was going to get an American Express credit card that will give me British Airways miles. Okay. And I remember thinking through, okay, so let me make sure that I always use this card for my expenses so I'll get British Airways miles. So now you have a situation here that you have a pastor who is buying things for the church and he's benefiting from the miles. Now, I talked to the treasurer. He was absolutely fine with it, the conference treasurer, no problem with it. But there was a conflict of interest here. And there were some members that looked at this and said, this is not right. And they were right. Just because something is not illegal doesn't make it lawful. I'll say that again. Just because something is not illegal does not make it lawful. There is no, and if you work for the Adventist Church, let me tell you this very clearly. There should be no benefit of the doubt anywhere.
Yeah.
There is no benefit of the doubt. But he's a good pastor. He's doing the work for the Lord. What's the problem if he gets some British Airways miles? No. So a lot of my issues had to do with a misalignment of values. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the General Conference is just how careful they are with our receipts. Did you know that the receipts in the General Conference, they can be seen by up to 16 people? Once I submit a receipt of my corporate credit card, up to 16 people will look at it, including the auditors at the end of the trail. This means that I need to be extremely careful with how I use tithe and God's money. And there is no benefit of the doubt.
God bless you.
And my goodness, did my life get better when I started being very precise with my speech. Never, I try my best not to exaggerate. I try my best to tell the truth, or at least not to lie. And that's something that you're talking about, Alicia.
Yes.
It's the values that drive us. And you would find more opportunities when you are led from your values, when there is an alignment between what you believe, what you say, and what you do. You know, your brain, your mouth, your mind, your mouth, and your hands. If what you do is in alignment with what you say and what you believe, and what you think, then more opportunities will come our way. People will trust you more. And I think that's a beautiful thought. We don't have much time.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. And what I want to just quickly ask is a question. This concept of 10,000 hours is something I came to really see forcefully as I review this book. And I'm asking myself, so here we are, you are helping us on this journey, grooming us in this particular area so that as digital missionaries, we can be able to assist our local fields. And I'm asking, so does it mean that we need to push this for 10,000 deliberate hours for us to be very good, to be able to help the church? And like you rightly pointed out, that's give or take about 10 years. And here is the church in need of these particular skills now. And here are many of us who are new in this area, and we are going to be able to be of use to the church. So how do we balance this? That's my question. Thank you.
Excellent question. Let's talk about this. You are interested in helping the church with digital evangelism because that's so important. But how do you develop those gifts now if the church needs it now and it will take you 10 years to become amazing at it? That's a great question. One of the greatest needs that the church has are mentors and leaders. And you're right. The church needs this now, but the church will need this in 10 years. And the beauty of not owning the church and having the Holy Spirit own the church is that he's in charge of that process. We just need to find the people that God has already led to 10,000 hours, and those that will develop their skills are given opportunity now to develop their skills in order to get there. So one of the people that is on the line that is here with us is Ace. Now, when I met Ace, he was a leader in the Philippines. He was a lay person in the Philippines helping with the media centers. But today there are over 100 people that Ace is responsible for. I'm not sure he's ever led 100, 120, 140 people at the same time. So he is learning how to do that, on the ground. He's developing those gifts, and who knows where God will take Ace in the future, and Rowena, his wife. Who knows? I see Susan here. I think Susan Diok, I think she's the leader of the writing team. Is that right? I don't remember. I think she is the leader of the writing team. She's leading 7 people in the Philippines who are writing. So God is developing her gifts in both writing and in leadership. And so God is giving opportunities, and it is incumbent on each person to develop those opportunities as much as possible. And this is, and we just surrender to the Holy Spirit and say, God, what I can do today is this. All I have are these little fish and bread. That's all I have. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes God takes that and he transforms it into something that only he can do. So, humanly speaking, 10,000 hours, but God can change that very quickly. So that's That's that. All right. Thank you, everyone. Our time is up. Believe it or not, I have another meeting. I saw Abraham Bakari here. I started the day with Bakari at 7 a.m. this morning, and now I'm not even ending the day yet. We have one more meeting to do with search engine optimization. But for now, I thank you for watching this episode of Sam's Book Club. I hope it's been a blessing to you. Next week is our last week of this series, and we're going to study what we're going to do with the book club thereafter. But next week, we will talk about a very important book, a book that also will transform your life or should transform your life. And that book is Ego is the Enemy. Ego is the Enemy. But I cannot end today. I thought I could, but I can't. I have to talk about third culture kids and about that. So I'm sorry for, and I think everybody that's supposed to be on the next meeting is also in this one. So you're just going to have to wait. There are two concepts that we have to talk about in this episode. I'm sorry. We were almost there. First, if you want to save money on your children's education, invest everything you have when they're teenagers. I'll say that again. If you want to save money in your children's education, invest everything you have in giving them opportunities to follow their what they're passionate and what they find meaningful during their teenage years. So my oldest son loves animals. It's not normal. You know, he lives for his animals and looking for animals, and it's what you would expect Steve Irwin, you know, the guy who died some time ago. It's what you expect his childhood to have been like. That's my eldest son. So I have decided, he doesn't know this yet, but I have decided to take all of his college funds and invest in him during his teenage years so that he can experience as much animals as possible. Okay, so that's my goal. My second son, Joshua, I'm not sure what he likes. So far, sharks and engineering. And I can't find a mix between those two, but he's only 8 years old. I'm going to wait until he's 12. Alyssa said Minecraft. I read your lips there because you're muted. But Minecraft, absolutely right. So what am I going? I don't know yet. Miles, I'm not sure. He's a perfect pastor or doctor, very compassionate, very nice to others. You know, so one of those things. And that's my experience. My parents invested everything they had so that I could learn English. So they sent me to England and they invested everything. When I came back, I started university at 17. When I was 18, the college where I was doing theology asked me to teach English. And I started teaching English. And one of the perks is that my fees were paid for. So I got a scholarship because I was an employee of the university. So I taught English for a few years. And then my master's was paid for because the Trans-European Division and the South England Conference sponsored my master's. And now the General Conference is sponsoring my PhD. So if you invest your money, and I could tell you loads of stories of this, of people that receive scholarships for all of their undergraduate and graduate studies, but they have to invest that time when you're a teenager. That's the last time you actually have plenty of time. Think about that for a moment. That is the last time you have plenty of time. If I came to Alyssa now and I said, Alyssa, why don't you try a new hobby? What can you do your 10,000 hours that would not be what you're doing now? You don't even have time to breathe, let alone invest in that time somewhere else. So if you're already a professional, it's very hard for you to invest in a different 10,000 hours in doing something else that you don't have really the opportunity for. When you're a teenager, is the last time that you get to decide how you invest most of your time. So instead of taking children to 262 extracurricular activities such as sports and music and this and that and this and that, no, what is it that they love that they would do? And here's a measurement. If they spend 6 hours and they thought it was just 15 minutes and there is meaning in that, then let them invest further. That's really an important thing. And Karen, if you're still there, yes, you are. Talk to us about third culture kids and why that matters.
I think I'm a third culture kid. I was born in a country that was different than my passport and grew up there. Well, a third culture kid, the definition is basically I grew up in Latino America. There's a big piece of me that's Latina, but there's a big piece of me that's also American. However, I'm not 100% either. I am a combination of those two. And somebody who has had an opportunity anytime, I always really, really encourage parents, anytime your child has an opportunity, or you can make the opportunity for them to go to another culture, live in that culture, learn the language, understand the culture, they will come out with the ability to see both sides of issues. That's just one thing, but being able to see both sides of issues. So, from a political standpoint, I understand a lot of times where the Democrats are coming from, and I understand where the Republicans are coming from. Not because I adhere to one or the other necessarily, but because I can see both sides. And that is a characteristic of many, many third culture kids, because they've had to live between worlds. So that's a huge plus. Having another language is a huge plus. Being able to have a completely different worldview. And I don't know if this is true of all third culture kids, but there have been some interesting studies. I will see if I can find them and shoot some your direction, Sam. But people that have been raised as a missionary's kid, as a military brat, as they call it, or whatever, in another culture than where their passport says they are from, the percentage of those people that end up with graduate school degrees is actually much higher than the general population. The drivenness to education, I think part of it is that it's not just the legacy that they have. A military kid has a legacy in the military, right? The Adventist missionary's kid or Baptist missionary's kid or whatever, their legacy, they know who they are and they know where they're going. And the bizarre thing is, and I don't know, Sam, if this has happened to you, but many, many third culture kids have told me this, and I have seen it myself. We can be in an airport in some country we've never been in, have no idea about anybody around us, and our eyes will zoom in, our ears will pick up, and we will figure out who in that group is a third culture kid. And as they say in America, knock on wood, you will never be wrong. Now, what was it about them? Was it because they spoke 2 languages? No, people in Europe speak 3, 4, 5 languages, okay? Because the countries are small, okay? Is it the way they were dressed? Did they look a certain way? Not necessarily, Is it because they were Christians? No, not necessarily, because third culture can be military that has nothing to do with a Christian mission. And the only thing that I've ever been able to figure out is that the typical third culture kid knows why they are here, and they know where they're going, and they know what their legacy is. And they have had opportunities to be in leadership roles often from a very young age. However, I have also known people who have not grown up in a third culture, but their parents have gone out of their way to give them that same legacy, to teach them those values, like Alicia was talking about earlier, of absolute honesty and hard work and responsibility. And I have a previous coworker that comes from extremely poor upbringing so far as finances are concerned. Basically lived in what we would consider extremely substandard housing. That person has a PhD from Cambridge today and is in church leadership. How do you get from there to here? It is personal decisions. It's grabbing every opportunity you have. It's the 10,000 hours, if there's any way. It's the ability to grab on to those things that are important and do something with it. And they're high up in leadership. And you look from where, and I know several people that fall in this category, where they came from and where they are today. And you say, that doesn't even make sense.
There are plenty of them. Karen, thank you so much for this understanding third culture kid philosophy, and has really helped me, because one of the bad things, one of the negative things, is that you always feel like you don't belong. You don't belong anywhere. I'm not English.
Yes.
I'm not really Brazilian, but now I am, and that's okay. I don't know. It's something that is easy for you to feel rejected and to feel that you don't quite belong anywhere.
And that's absolutely true. But one of the things that helped me, at least, because I absolutely felt like when we came back to the States that I didn't belong here. I felt like I belonged there more than here, and yet I looked like everybody here, so it just felt so weird, Canvassing. Summer after summer of canvassing took care of a lot of that. It teaches you to deal with rejection. and be able to shrug it off and say, oh, well, that is so bad that I'm so sad they're having a bad day, instead of going, oh my word, they don't like me. I might as well just quit, you know?
Yeah,
You
because
just,
you
it
need
just
to
rolls
listen
off.
to 20 no's.
Yeah,
No, 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 no. Yes.
right.
Celebrate the yes, and it changes who you are. Absolutely. Well, I think this is it, friends. As you can tell, I could not let that go. I had to cover this. And this now officially is the end of Sam's Book Club for this episode. Let's have a word of prayer for you that is in a position of leadership or that is doing your best with your craft to be a better YouTuber, to be a better Facebooker, to work better with Instagram, to be a better writer, to be a better leader, administrator, whatever it is that you do. God is calling you to try and be better today than you were yesterday. And after 10,000 hours of doing this, your contribution will be absolutely priceless to the kingdom. For those that have, more will be given. Don't take your gifts and hide it. It does not end. It did not end well for that servant that hid his talent. When the master came, he said, "Depart from me, you wicked and lazy servant." I don't want to hear that from God, and neither do you. So if you've received some gifts, use it, develop it. Do your best with the opportunities you have. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for those that have followed so far in this book club. Thank you for this episode that shows how you provide opportunities in your will and in your wisdom to some of us. Lord, we can also acknowledge that many suffer because they don't have those opportunities. And we pray that we will create such an environment that people have the opportunity to serve you, to get better at what they do, and to do it to the best of their abilities. Lord, we want meaning in our work, and that you provide through the lives that are transformed through this digital evangelism initiative. Thank you. In your name, the name of Jesus, amen. Thank you very much. See you next week.